Daniel brought to my attention the wonderful work of Kim West, and Kim West's research connected actually to the beginnings of the Kulturhuset in Stockholm, where Pontus Hultén started, who later went then to the Moderna Museet and then to the Centre Georges Pompidou, and the connections, the early connections of this vision of an interdisciplinary art center, the Kulturhuset, and its link and ramification to cybernetics. Kim West is a critic based in Stockholm. He's a member of the editorial boards of OEI and also Side magazine, and was formerly the Swedish editor of Kunstkritik. He's writing a PhD thesis on progressive and techno-utopian exhibition and institutional projects connected to what I mentioned, the Kulturhuset, and that happens at the Department of Aesthetics at Söderström University in Stockholm. We're very grateful to Daniel Birnbaum for introducing us to Kim West's work. Kim's talk will actually be connected to the transformation of the art institution. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Kim West.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hans Ulrich. It's of course a great pleasure to be here. I've certainly never had a tougher act to follow. Well, so some very brief remarks then about the conditions under which an integration of the Contemporary Art Museum with advanced information technologies and networks could be compatible with a project for social transformation, with references to Pontus Hultén's and Moderna Museet's Kulturhuset and Information Center projects in Stockholm around 1970. So, what is the contemporary exhibitionary complex? This is the question I'm sure you're all dying to answer right now. The concept was introduced in a famous text by the cultural historian Tony Bennett, and describes the complex of discourses, institutions, and media within which the modern art museum, and more generally modern exhibitionary apparatuses, develop their individual yet interdependent characteristics, the specific regimes of visibility and power. The subject of Bennett's study is the birth of the modern institution of the museum in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, and its constitutive relationship to the concurrent development of a number of other institutions, display technologies, and media, world exhibitions, amusement parks, department stores, and so on. Now, these are not the institutions that define the exhibitionary complex today. The display technologies in relationship to which the contemporary exhibitionary apparatus articulates its specificity. Instead, and to express it kind of bluntly, the exhibitionary complex today consists of digital network media and then of other more or less anachronistic institutions that are gradually being integrated into or rendered compatible with such media. And whatever resists such integration faces a highly precarious future, if not extinction. This is what in related fields is happening to the basic cinematic apparatus and to traditional news media, to name just two obvious examples. The Contemporary Art Museum is inevitably involved in this process of integration. To understand what's at stake in this process, we can think of an emblematic project, the famous Google Art project. This is the project to create a global digital art museum with high-quality images of works from the collections of major museums and institutions from around the world. The images have detailed captions and are curated into subsets by directors and curators from the different museums in question, as well as by online users. We know what Google wants generally, to establish a total and global archive of information. Until recently, the company's mission statement read, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. So at the horizon of the Google Art project is the vision of a digital, universally exhaustive, and globally accessible art museum. Now the question is, of course, what Google wants with these museum collections. Their business model is based on mining user data so as to be able to customize their proper information output, to direct individualized advertisement streams to their users, and to sell the data on to other corporations in order for them to be able to organize their own production, distribution, communication, and so on in accordance with that information. Today, of course, we're also acutely aware of the deep alliances between major data mining corporations and various intelligence agencies. Museum collections are another archive to be integrated within this total archive, with the added value of lending to that total archive cultural and institutional legitimacy. On a superficial level, the possible effects of this process for the museum would be an intensification of the process of mass customization, to borrow a concept from Reinhold Martin, where the statistics derived from the accumulated user data would feed back into and influence everything from ways of capturing attention to acquisition policies, exhibition programs, and museum architecture. On a more fundamental level, this process would represent an alignment of the social logic of the museum with the general logic that underlies this process, which is the logic of contemporary capitalism in its drive to extend the field of capital accumulation into further dimensions of social existence. In one word, were the process characteristic of the contemporary exhibitionary complex to be fully realized, what would stand to be lost would be the possibility for the museum to function as a site for autonomous art, which is art as we know it. One project that I believe is important in the genealogy of the contemporary exhibitionary complex is the project developed by Pontus Hultén and the group around Moderna Museet in Stockholm in the years around 1970 to rethink the museum as an information center. In the mid-1960s, Moderna Museet had been invited to present a proposal for a possible relocation of their facilities to a new building in the city's modernized downtown district, the Kulturhuset. The project eventually imploded, and the building wound up housing a municipal culture center, a library, and the Swedish parliament. But the Moderna Museet group continued to work on their vision for a new museum, and the most abstract version of the proposal they developed was a diagram they called the circular function model. It essentially described the museum as a macro computer, a vast countercultural information processor. According to this model, the museum would consist of 4 concentric circles. The first circle, the museum's outer layer, would be a membrane or an interface connecting to the universe of everyday life. It would be characterized by an accelerated concentration of information, so an influx of raw, untreated information, and it would feature, for example, teleprinters from all news agencies. The second circle would be a layer for workshops, where the information registered at the outer layer could be processed. So here means of production would be available, from simple hammers and nails to paintbrushes and the computer. The workshops would be open for anyone, artists, museum employees, visitors, anyone. The third circle would be the exhibition layer. Here, the products from the workshops, that is, the processed information, could be presented alongside or interspersed with artworks in some more traditional sense. The fourth circle, the museum's core, would constitute the institution's memory, so the collection. Here, selections of the processed information would be stored, as well as Moderna Museet's ordinary collection. So all the works in the core would be immediately available for public browsing, but could also be transferred outwards to the exhibition layer, which would function as an instrument of reflection. So, moving through the different layers of this circular or perhaps spherical museum, the visitor would therefore be confronted with information in different states. The artwork is understood as a parcel of processed information in accordance with a basic input-output model, as data registered at the outer layer, then refined in workshops, then exhibited, and then perhaps stored in the center's memory core. Artists and visitors are understood as active users who employ the instruments at hand in the workshop layer in order to process information gathered at the outer layer, transforming it into artworks. And the exhibition is conceived as an interface or media which negotiates between the productive and the storing layers of the center, and which then transmits configurations of contents from these layers. So, what does the model of the museum as an information center tell us about how an integration of the museum with advanced information technologies may be compatible with the project of social transformation? There are two reasons I believe that this diagram has an important place in the genealogy of the contemporary exhibitionary complex. The first one is that, unlike several other comparable projects in the late 1960s, it did not address the question of the relationship between the museum and emerging computing technologies as a question of use. Pioneering museological projects such as Everett Ellen's Museum Computer Network, founded in New York in 1967, were also involved in a generally McLuhanesque attempt to think the museum as media, to quote the title of the lecture Ellen gave at Moderna Museet in Stockholm that same year. But what they were actually trying to do was to rationalize museum filing systems, to standardize and computerize records of museum collections. So information technology was understood as a tool that could be put to use by the museum, considered as something already defined and self-sufficient. With their model for the museum as an information center, the Moderna Museet group instead addressed that relationship at the level of the museum institution as such. That is, they attempted to think how the core functions of the museum would be transformed by the impact of new media technologies, and how that would change the social logic and the possibilities of that institution. In this sense, I believe that the Information Center project is one among a number of early attempts to reconsider the structure of the exhibitionary apparatus under new technological conditions, where the Fun Palace that Hans-Ulrich mentioned is another example. And in this same sense, the Information Center model anticipates contemporary enterprises that attempt to structurally remodel the museum institution, aligning it with the demands of the major commercial platforms of digital network media. The second related reason is that the Information Center proposal was an attempt to respond precisely to the further question of the possibility of social transformation, of how an institution devoted to autonomous art could serve a function within a wider project of democratization and emancipation. The Information Center was explicitly conceived as an apparatus for the transmission of counter-information, where the institution's users would refine the raw data that would flow into the outer layer, and then render the processed information available as a critical corrective to the information transmitted by mainstream news outlets and mass media. But what was essential here, and this will be my concluding point, was that the Moderna Museet group did not approach this question as a problem internal to the institution, in order then to ask how the institution could have a transformative impact on the surrounding social field. Instead, they approached the problem from the point of view of the objective of the process of transformation. That is, the question they asked was how cultural modes of production, means of distribution, techniques of organizing reception in general would have to be arranged so as to contribute to an extended individual and collective self-determination at the level of the social. And then what role the museum institution could play in achieving that condition. So how could the museum function as a mediator or as a catalyst within this process of transformation? It was this problem that the Moderna Museet group attempted to respond to with the Information Center model, and their project was therefore inseparable from the wider experimental political project, whose historical moment today seems distant, of reconceiving of the cultural, economic, and social policies of the welfare state in accordance with an ideal of equality and increased self-determination. So, rather than some techno-utopian miracle of a transformation, I'm summoning the ghost of social democratic cultural policy. My simple point is this, that the question of how the museum plus information may equal social transformation, that question is meaningless if it's not addressed at the level of the social. In other words, we should not be content with asking how the institution of the museum can remain an institution of autonomy within the contemporary exhibitionary complex, as that complex is being subsumed under the economic logic dominating today's digital network media. Instead, we should ask how the ideal of autonomy could be realized in the exhibitionary complex and beyond in the field of digital network media, as they exert an ever stronger influence over the definition of social life. Thank you very much.